I gave them everything, my time, my loyalty, my hard-earned success, and in return, they handed me a debt, a burden, and a betrayal I'll never forget. They celebrated Cormac while I was left scraping by, unseen, unappreciated, discarded like I never mattered. And now, after using me, they expect my forgiveness, my money, my help. No. Let them drown in the mess they created. Let them feel what I felt, forgotten, abandoned, nothing. They deserve every second of it. Growing up, I learned quickly that in my family, there were two roles, the one who was cherished and the one who was tolerated. My older brother, Cormac, was the former. The golden boy. The one who could do no wrong. And me? Falim, the reliable afterthought. If Cormac got a pat on the back for an average test score, I got a nod for straight A's. If he forgot to do a chore, it was shrugged off. If I forgot, I was irresponsible. It wasn't that I craved their approval, not anymore. I had simply accepted my place. By the time we both graduated from college, Cormac had been spoon-fed his way through life while I had built my own. I worked since I was 16, saving every penny, scraping by, and earning every opportunity myself. I never expected gratitude, but deep down, I wondered, just once, would they acknowledge what I had accomplished? Would I finally be more than just the responsible one? That answer came soon enough. And it wasn't the one I had hoped for. Because while Cormac was handed a brand new car as a reward for simply existing, I was handed something else entirely, something that would change everything. The day should have been a celebration. I had done everything right, graduated with honors, secured a job before even walking across the stage, and built a future for myself without relying on anyone. But when I stepped into the living room that evening, expecting maybe a small moment of acknowledgement, I was instead blindsided. Cormac was beaming, his hands wrapped around a set of brand new car keys. A sleek, midnight blue luxury sedan sat parked in the driveway, gleaming under the sun. My parents stood beside him, smiling with pride. "Congratulations, son," my father said, clapping Cormac on the back. "You deserve this." I stood there, waiting. Waiting for my turn, for some kind of recognition. But there was nothing. No keys. No card. Not even a handshake. Just an envelope that my mother handed me with a casual smile, as if it held a gift of equal weight. Confused, I opened it. Inside was a list, line after line of debts, expenses, household bills. The total at the bottom made my stomach drop. I frowned. "What is this?" My mother sighed, like I was being dramatic. "It's just fair, Falim. You've been saving up for years. We figured you could help out. Cormac doesn't have much right now, and you're the responsible one." I stared at her, then at my father, then at Cormac, who had the audacity to shrug and say, "Come on, man. You always said money doesn't matter to you." Something inside me cracked. They had rewarded Cormac for simply existing while I, the one who had worked tirelessly, was expected to clean up their mess. Not even as a favor, but as an obligation. I felt the weight of betrayal settle in my chest. They had never planned to celebrate me. They had only planned to use me. I exhaled slowly, folding the paper neatly, my hand steady even as my heart pounded. I looked at my parents and gave them a small, almost amused smile. "Thank you for this," I said. "It's a real eye-opener." And with that, I turned and walked away. I packed my bags that night, shoving clothes into a suitcase with a calmness that surprised even me. No yelling, no arguments, no dramatic confrontation. I was done wasting energy on people who saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account. My entire life had been a test of patience, a constant balancing act between wanting to be seen and accepting that I never would be. But this was the final straw. I could hear them downstairs, laughing, celebrating Cormac's new car like it was a crowning achievement. My father's deep chuckle, my mother's delighted hum as she fussed over him, and Cormac's smug voice soaking up every ounce of their attention. They didn't even notice I was leaving. That was the part that hurt the most. I dragged my suitcase to the front door, gripping the handle tighter when my mother finally noticed me. "Falim, where are you going?" she asked, frowning slightly, like I was being irrational. I turned the handle away. She blinked, not understanding. "Come on, don't be dramatic. You know we appreciate you. We just assumed you'd help the family, like you always do." "Like I always do." I let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. Just exhaustion. "I'm not the one who needs help," I said simply, stepping out onto the porch. "Falim." I didn't let her finish. I shut the door behind me and walked away without looking back. The night air was crisp against my skin, the coolness soothing the heat burning beneath my chest. I took a deep breath, inhaling the freedom I had just chosen. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being second place in my own family. They had made their choice. Now, I was making mine. I spent the next few weeks letting my anger simmer, keeping it bottled up as I tried to figure out my next move. But no matter how much distance I put between myself and my family, the betrayal still gnawed at me. It wasn't just about the car or the bill they had dumped on me, it was years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated like I didn't matter. And now, they had the audacity to act like I was the unreasonable one for walking away. At first, the calls and texts were easy to ignore. My mother tried to sound gentle, as if this was all just a misunderstanding that could be fixed with a single conversation. My father took the more direct approach, ordering me to stop sulking and do the right thing for the family. And Cormac? He was the worst of them all. "Dude, why are you being like this? It's not even a big deal." Not a big deal. That was the moment my frustration boiled over into pure rage. I had worked tirelessly for years, scraping together savings, being responsible, making sacrifices, all while Cormac coasted through life with a safety net they never once offered me. And when it came time to acknowledge my hard work, they rewarded me with a bill, expecting me to clean up their mess like it was my duty. I clenched my fists as I stared at my phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. Every message, every smug, guilt-tripping word made it clear, they didn't regret what they had done. They just regretted my reaction. I wanted to scream at them, tell them how unfair this was, how disgusted I was by their entitled expectations. But I knew better. They weren't listening, and they never had. So, I made a choice. I blocked their numbers. They had spent years treating me like an afterthought, assuming I would always be there when they needed me. Let's see how they handled life without me. The silence that followed was almost eerie. At first, I expected them to show up at my door, demanding an explanation, forcing me to hear them out. But they didn't. Instead, there was just nothing. No calls, no messages, no last-ditch effort to convince me I was wrong. And somehow, that infuriated me even more. They had written me off as easily as they had written me out of their financial plans. For a while, I wondered if they even cared. Maybe they were too proud to admit they needed me, or maybe they really did believe I was the selfish one. Either way, I refused to reach out first. I buried myself in work, poured my energy into building something for myself, and told myself I didn't need them. But every now and then, late at night when the world was quiet, the anger would creep back in. All those years of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who did everything right, and for what? So I could be treated like an ATM while Cormac got handed everything on a silver platter. I thought I was done with them. But life had other plans. One evening, after a long day, I checked my voicemail out of habit. The moment I heard my mother's voice, I almost deleted it, but something in her tone made me pause. "Falim, I know you don't want to hear from us, but we need to talk. Things aren't going well." She sounded different. Tired. Hesitant. I frowned, scrolling through my missed calls. Several from her, a couple from my father, and one from a number I didn't recognize. I debated calling back but shook my head. No. They had made their choices. Then, just as I was about to put my phone down, another call came through, from Cormac. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. He never called. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Falim, his voice cracked. It's bad. Mom and Dad, he exhaled shakily. They need help. And you're the only one who can fix this. And just like that, my past came knocking. I let the silence stretch between us, savoring the moment. Cormac was never one to admit when he was in trouble, let alone when he needed my help. And now? Now he was desperate enough to come crawling, his voice shaking as he pleaded for me to fix the mess they had created. For years, I had been the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who worked tirelessly while Cormac was handed everything without lifting a finger. I was the afterthought, the reliable backup plan, always expected to pick up the pieces while he basked in the luxury of our parents' blind favoritism. But now their golden son had failed them. And they were finally paying the price. I leaned back in my chair, letting my amusement slip into my tone. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice calm, calculated. Mom and Dad spent years handing you everything. You got the house, the car, their unconditional support while I was left to fend for myself. And now that they've run out of money, I'm suddenly worth talking to. Cormac exhaled sharply. That's not fair. I chuckled, shaking my head. Oh, no, it's completely fair. He stammered, scrambling for an argument, but we both knew the truth. He was out of options. They all were. And I wasn't the naive, eager-to-please son they had once dismissed. You don't understand, he tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. They're going to lose everything. The house. Everything. There it was, the karmic justice I never thought I'd get to see. The very home they had denied me, the security they had stripped away from me, now slipping from their grasp. And I could save them. I had the resources, the power. But did I want to? I let out a slow breath, pretending to consider. Sounds like a personal problem, I said finally. Maybe you should figure it out, like I had to. His stunned silence was all the satisfaction I needed. I let the weight of my own words settle in the room, the silence stretching as Cormac struggled to process the reality I had just thrown back at him. He had always been the golden one, the chosen son, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. And now, for the first time in his life, he was facing what it felt like to be powerless. Falim, come on, he finally said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. It was strange to hear desperation instead, like he was just now realizing that I had the upper hand. You can't seriously just watch them struggle like this. I laughed, shaking my head as I leaned back in my chair. Cormac, what exactly do you think they did when I was struggling? Did they lift a finger to help me when I was drowning in student debt, working myself to exhaustion just to afford rent? No. They told me I'd figure it out because I was independent while they showered you with everything I had to fight for. He exhaled sharply, as if he hated hearing the truth spoken so plainly. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I cut him off. And now, the same parents who told me I wasn't entitled to anything are suddenly entitled to my help. What changed? Oh, that's right, they backed the wrong horse. His jaw clenched, but he had no rebuttal because he knew I was right. They had bet everything on him, invested in him like he was the surest path to success. And when he had squandered it, when their perfect plan had fallen apart, I was suddenly the valuable son again. Falim, please, he tried again, softer this time. I know things weren't fair, but they're still our parents. I stared at him for a long moment, letting his words sink in. And then, slowly, I smiled. No, Cormac, I said, my voice steady. They were your parents. I was just the backup plan. And with that, I ended the call. The knock at my door was loud, insistent. It wasn't the hesitant kind of knock that people use when they aren't sure if they're welcome. No, this was different. This was the knock of someone who thought they still had a say, that they could just walk into my life uninvited and demand something from me. I already knew who it was before I even checked the peephole. My parents were predictable, and when desperation set in, they always resorted to force rather than humility. Still, I took my time, letting them stew outside, waiting, uncertain if I would even answer. Finally, after a long pause, I pulled the door open, keeping my expression unreadable. My mother was standing there, her eyes red-rimmed, her face drawn tight with stress. My father was beside her, his usual commanding posture gone, replaced with something smaller, weaker. And just behind them, lingering like a shadow, was Cormac, his hands in his pockets, shifting on his feet like he didn't want to be here but had nowhere else to go. "Falim," my mother started, but I held up a hand, stopping her before she could even launch into her speech. "I know why you're here," I said calmly. "And you already know my answer." She blinked, caught off guard. "At least let us explain." "Explain what?" I leaned against the doorframe, my voice edged with something sharp. "That after years of favoring Cormac, after leaving me with nothing, after making it clear I was never worth your investment, you suddenly need me? That now, when your golden son has failed you, you're hoping I'll swoop in and clean up the mess?" My father's jaw clenched. "We're still family, Falim." I let out a cold chuckle. That didn't seem to matter when I was struggling. Silence. Then, my mother's voice wavered. "We'll lose everything if you don't help us." I met her gaze, and for the first time in my life, I saw it, fear. "Then you'd better start learning how to live with nothing," I said. And with that, I shut the door in their faces. For the first time in my life, I had power. Real power. Not the kind you beg for, not the kind you get as a consolation prize, but the kind you earn by walking away and making people realize they needed you more than you ever needed them. Days passed after I shut the door in their faces, and I could only imagine the chaos that followed. I didn't have to wonder for long, though. The messages started rolling in soon after, texts from my mother, my father, even distant relatives who had somehow been recruited into the desperate campaign to get me back on their side. At first, they tried guilt. "Falim, we're your parents. We raised you. How can you just abandon us like this?" Then came the anger. "You're being petty. You think you're better than us? Just wait, you'll regret this one day." And when neither of those worked, they moved on to full-blown desperation. "Please, son. We don't have anywhere else to go. We'll do anything. Just talk to us." I ignored them all. But then, something unexpected happened. Cormac reached out. Unlike my parents, he didn't send a barrage of messages, didn't try to manipulate me. He sent one text. "I get it now." That was it. 3 words. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the reply button. I hadn't expected this. Cormac, the golden child, the one who had everything handed to him, was he finally seeing the truth? Did he finally understand what our parents had done to me, how they had pushed me aside to lift him higher? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let him sit with that realization the same way I had been forced to sit with the truth for years. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. The perfect son, the one they had chosen over me, was starting to crack under the weight of the very system that had once worked in his favor. And for the first time, I wasn't the one being left behind. They were. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. Not just physically, not just financially, I was free in a way I had never imagined possible. No more guilt, no more obligations, no more bending over backward for people who only saw me as a safety net. I had spent years carrying the weight of my family's expectations, their demands, their constant reminders that I wasn't enough. But now, that burden was gone. I had stripped myself of it, walked away, and let them deal with the consequences of their own choices. And the best part? I felt lighter. Cormac had finally seen the truth. Whether or not he would ever say it outright, I knew he was starting to realize just how much had been handed to him at my expense. And my parents? They had lost their grip on me, their control, their ability to guilt me into fixing what they had broken. They were scrambling now, trying to patch together a life without the son they had dismissed for years. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had built something for myself, something real. My career was thriving, my bank account was stable, and for the first time, I was making decisions for me. I could travel if I wanted, pick up and leave, move to a new city without worrying about who needed me back home. I could invest in my future, spend my money on things that actually mattered to me, not on repaying debts I never agreed to take on. And the best part? I no longer cared what they thought of me. Their disappointment, their anger, their desperate attempts to reel me back in, it didn't affect me anymore. Because I finally understood something they never did, I was worth more than what I could give them. This was my life now. My choices, my freedom, my future. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was moving forward, completely unshackled from the past. And it felt damn good. The silence was deafening. After weeks of desperate calls, messages laced with guilt, and last-ditch attempts to manipulate me back into their control, my parents had finally stopped reaching out. No more, "We need to talk," texts. No more emails filled with hollow apologies. No more calls from Cormac trying to smooth things over. And yet, even in their absence, I could still feel the weight of everything they had done, the years of being overlooked, used, and discarded when it was convenient for them. But that weight wasn't dragging me down anymore. It was fuel. It was proof that I had done the right thing by walking away. Cormac had lost the car. My parents had lost their financial safety net. And all of them had lost the one person they had always expected to pick up the pieces. They were living in the ruins of their own decisions, forced to face a reality they had never prepared for, a reality where I wasn't there to fix things for them. I imagined them sitting in their quiet, uncomfortable home, finally understanding what it meant to struggle without someone to fall back on. I wondered if they had moments of regret, if they replayed all the times they had dismissed me, if they saw now how unfair they had been. But the truth was, I didn't care anymore. I couldn't care. Because while they were stuck in the past, I was too busy building my future. My career was on an upward trajectory, my independence had never felt more secure, and for the first time, my life was mine. No one could take that from me, not anymore. I didn't hate them. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I simply wasn't theirs to control anymore. And that was what probably hurt them the most. They had spent so long believing they could treat me however they wanted, that I would always be there no matter what. But now, they were finally learning the truth. I had outgrown them. And I wasn't coming back. The weight was finally gone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the burden of my family's expectations, their manipulation, or their problems. The air felt lighter, the silence in my life no longer suffocating but freeing. I had stepped away, not just from them but from the version of myself that had always bent over backward, hoping to be acknowledged, to be enough. And now, standing on my own, I realized I was enough, always had been. I hadn't just survived their betrayal, their favoritism, their selfishness. I had won. Cormac was struggling without me to shield him from consequences. My parents, once so confident in their choices, were now living the harsh reality they had created. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My business was flourishing, my home, was a place of peace, not tension. No unexpected calls demanding I step in. No guilt trips disguised as family obligations. No more being treated like an afterthought. And the best part? I felt no guilt. I didn't wonder if I had done the right thing. I didn't lie awake questioning my decisions. I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. They had made their choice. And now, so had I. One evening, I sat on my balcony, the city lights glowing below, a drink in hand, and let out a slow, deep breath. This was my life now. Not dictated by their problems, not overshadowed by Cormac, not defined by my past. Just mine. For years, I had dreamed of the moment I'd be free, but I had never imagined the overwhelming sense of peace that would come with it. The absence of their chaos wasn't empty, it was full. Full of new opportunities, of self-respect, of a future I had built with my own hands. I had one, and they would never be able to take that away from me. Smiling to myself, I raised my glass to the night sky. Here's to freedom. Here's to finally choosing me.